case for next generation circular materials. And we have a really lovely panel for this purpose. And this session is being hosted with Sattva and Canopy. I would love to invite Nicole Rycroft to kick us off for this session. She is the founder and executive director of Canopy. Nicole, over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. I'll just pop the microphone up a little bit. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know that this is a very busy schedule that everybody is juggling, so we appreciate it. This is going to be a very quick session, so pop your seatbelts on and get ready for a fast ride. I am going to just provide a little bit of context, and then we're going to go into a really spectacular panel discussion. So if we start off, the focus of our conversation today will really be focused on the diversification of the fiber basket, the industrial fiber basket. As we know, we'll be covering kind of the systems design and constraints that are currently acting as barriers to the scaling of next-gen and circular alternatives. We'll be exploring some of the strategic shifts that can, tangible actions and shifts that need to happen to align capital and infrastructure and procurement, and some of those fast emerging opportunities that are most exciting. And then obviously moving from insights that each of us in this room have into tangible actions. If we look at the fiber value chain, we are on a trajectory to 160 million tons of fiber being online by 2030. It is carried currently with a material base that is actually largely inherited from the 20th century. It's largely dependent on a handful of legacy inputs, and with that, it creates a vulnerability. I think we've all seen with the Strait of Hormuz that concentration actually presents a very real risk in today's world, both in terms of the geopolitical context, as we can see, as well as the increased intensity of climate disruption. And I think for much of the conversation that we'll be focused on, given Canopy's focus within the viscose supply chain, we're looking at viscose in particular as a 7 million ton. It's the third largest fiber used by the textile and the fashion industry. It's often less spoken about, but the 7 million tons that's currently produced and growing quite quickly, less than 1% of that is coming from non-wood sources, and that in itself, we think, places this value chain in particular in a particularly volatile situation, both because there are increased intensity and frequency of forest fires that is projected to increase between now and 2030, and so you have a reduced fiber supply basket. There is, of course, the constraints and the volatility that's happening with intensification of climate impacts. There's increased competition for that limited supply. And then you have a growing swath of regulations coming in key markets, not just the EU, but notably with that as a leading jurisdiction, which does all of those factors combine to increase just a volatility around both supply continuity and price. There are alternatives. They do exist now, and they have been proven at pilot scale. And we have many of those innovators now getting green lights to move forward to commercial scale. Those next-gen alternatives, which I will probably refer to quite often in this conversation, refers to fibers that are currently often seen as waste, but are cellulose-rich and currently failing to be valorized, but an incredible opportunity to be bringing them back into the value chain. So agricultural residues, obviously microbial cellulose from industrial food waste, and of course a big topic of conversation, the circular economy and textile to textile recycling, with a particular focus on advanced chemical recycling. So less focus on the mechanical, which of course is quite well developed and a very important mainstay, but on the chemical recycling side of things. There are numerous advantages from a social perspective, value-added revenue streams, to rural communities, to waste picking communities, the reduction of carbon footprints are really helping brands. Oftentimes for brands, 85% of their climate footprint, their nature footprint is wrapped up in the raw materials that they buy, so there's clear advantages from that perspective. Less water that's needed in the production, and so year-round continuity being enabled by the transition to textiles being the feedstock or agricultural residues, but also from an investment perspective, lower OPEX once up and operating at scale, and for investors, strong IRRs. And Canopy really wanted to drill in because I think for a long time we've spoken about circularity from a sustainability perspective. I think increasingly it's becoming a resiliency priority, and we really wanted to drill into the economics of it. And so we have really kind of run the numbers, so to speak, through a business model. And the economics tip far earlier than the industry and even ourselves would have predicted originally. So in addition to building supply chain resiliency, taking the guesswork out of regulatory compliance, and aligning more broadly with customer expectations and investor expectations, what we found through this economic modeling, and we're just doing a sneak peek today, is that moving to 5% integration of next-gen inputs to viscose production is actually a no-regret pathway. That for a producer that has a medium risk tolerance, so balancing both profit and risk, that adopting 5% circular textile inputs by 2028 actually is validated from a business perspective just as a hedge, without there being any price shocks on the wood side or from regulations. If you add in a one-time price shock, which if we look back 20 years at the pricing of wood, certainly is on the cards and has happened consistently, it's a fairly modest increase in wood pricing that validates the pathway forward to adoption of next gen. And so as we move forward, 5% is the initial door between now and 2028, and at that point then we start to shift over to a scaling pathway purely through learning and through scaling, and on track for within the decade having 30 to 50% of the fiber basket being next gen and fundamentally more sustainable. So that is the context for this conversation, and I think that's enough from me, although I'll be the moderator, so I'll be continuing to speak, but I do want to bring up our spectacular panelists. And so if you can join us on stage as we move through. We've got Kathleen Redeman, who's the VP of Commercial Strategy at Circ, not to be confused with IRC. And so Kathleen is, Circ, for those that don't know, is a breakthrough venture, a technology venture that can recycle polycotton, which of course is the vast majority of textile waste, and they're moving to commercial scale with their first plant in India, and in France. Well, that wasn't a spoiler alert. That wasn't for media publication. Vadaraj, if you can join us as well, Vadaraj Kulkarni, who's the business head at Vela Cellulose, one of the world's largest producers of man-made cellulosic fiber, where he's steering both major investments in lyocell capacity and broader next-gen capacity. Sundar, if you can join us as well. Probably Sundar is known to probably many people in this room, head of affairs India for the H&M Group, sitting precisely kind of where many brands globally are kind of grappling with their sourcing ambitions and where and how to meet kind of policy and infrastructure realities. And then lastly, but by no means least, we have Paul Wright, who's the Group Executive ED for ESG at PDS Ventures, with many decades of experience. Yeah, okay. So we're going to transition over into a panel discussion, and I think there's also a little bit of Slido activity at some point. So, given the conversation that we have, which is really around, I think, the fiber basket and the fiber system, kind of how we match the realities of demand and interest to infrastructure, to capital, to kind of market pull-through at scale. We're going to do just a quick lightning round to start off with. So if each of you, and we can kind of go down, we can just go down the line here, can speak to a specific moment, be it a particular meeting, a number that crossed your desk, kind of like a conversation that you were, or a decision that you were part of, where you realized that fiber diversification stopped being just a sustainability conversation and moved into one that was more of a commercial, be it around resiliency or strategic competitiveness. And so what was that moment, and what did it change about how you operate? Buddy, do you want to start? Yeah.
Hi. I think there is a moment where we got a first order for a bamboo-based product, which is picking up a lot. That is surprising because bamboo as a grass has been there for ages, but that as a more alternative feedstock to wood-based pulp was something that was interesting, and we've been growing from there.
I think the moment for me, so I came originally, before this, I worked for Fashion for Good. I was Director of Innovation there, and we had a lot of, I think, over 2,000 innovations in our portfolio. And I think the moment that changed for me was where the industry started to ask for a conference specifically focused on recycling. So now you have, for example, the Textile Recycling Expo in Brussels. They also have a chapter in Charlotte. And it was the first time a specific innovation was pulled out of the pack, because I looked after traceability, dyeing solutions, washing solutions, AI solutions, like you name it, anything across the supply chain. And for the first time, people said, actually, we want to know more about this. And resultantly attracted a lot of different innovators in the space, or technology providers, and really signaled to the market that this is the moment for change.
Great. Sundar.
Thank you. I think we've been, as a company, been looking at fiber diversification over some years now, because if we look at the macro environment, there is quite a bit of volatility when it comes to fiber supplies. And this is kind of peakened now, like you mentioned during the introduction, with the crisis in the Middle East. And we do see polyester, especially the staple fiber prices, sort of zoom up all of a sudden. And that would mean that we need to really find alternate ways. And we've also been seeing supply chain bottlenecks ever since the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't have containers. We don't have, we have shortage of shipping routes. Insurance prices are hiking up. So we really need to find sustainable sources. That's what has driven us.
So resiliency overall.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And Paul?
I think my example is with a previous employer, and the CEO was quite ambitious around sustainability, so much so that actually I never thought I'd be recruiting data analysts within a sourcing and sustainability team. But it was like turning on the light in the room once you saw the data. And once we had the data, we went for a sustainable linked loan with our bank. But we were struggling to get traction. We had some traction with the buying teams, but we weren't really getting anywhere. And sitting down with the CEO, we decided to change the KPIs of the buyers, because one, the CEO was on the hook with the sustainability targets to maintain the sustainability linked loan. So on timber, cotton, and packaging reduction, we had the data. In the textiles area around cotton, we knew where the towel buyer was, where the bedding buyer was, and they're all in different places. So we almost set the glide slope of, actually, this buyer's at 12,000 feet, and you've got to land at 12,000 feet. You're at 38,000 feet, so your glide path is there. And it was 25% of their bonus. And driving home,
that's a motivator.
Driving home that night and coming back in the morning, I worked with a different buying team. It completely changed the conversations.
interesting, 4 different vantage points, all 4 very kind of commercial, kind of like, this is not sort of aspirational or values driven, right? Like all 4 kind of commercial imperatives to move forward. Now, I think one of the things that we're really seeing clearly is the tension, the dynamic tension that there is between interest in next-gen materials and the kind of ability of the system to actually scale at the pace that we need. So the allocation of capital, the policy frameworks, the market pull-through, the infrastructure at scale. And so part of that feels a little bit like it's around allocation, some of it kind of like timing, kind of like with comedy, it's all about the timing and kind of syncing that up. And so, Sundar, maybe we can start with you. You know, obviously H&M is spearheading a lot of movement in this space. And from your vantage point, what are some of the changes that you feel it will take for next-gen materials to become mainstream rather than them being limited to more of the capsule collection volume, and that kind of the steps that need to happen for large-scale adoption?
I think in order for us to accelerate, move away from pilots after pilots and capsules, we need to marry innovation, capital, and infrastructure. I think there is a lot of innovation that's happening, and I'm sitting with innovative companies. I was sitting with them yesterday as well. We do see capital flowing in, especially when it comes to the recycling technologies, where we need to focus more on, and I think that's very commonsensical, which is infrastructure. And this is where policy comes in, because without the state coming in, the infrastructure development is not going to happen. So what do we mean by infrastructure? So what we mean by infrastructure is, what do we do in the upstream? Because we need to have a regular, reliable, traceable, formal supply of feedstock. All these words are important from a regulatory standpoint. We need to have a proper collection mechanism. We need to have technology-enabled sorting. And then we need to have the right logistics in place in order for companies like Bharat to buy those feedstock and convert it into fiber. And this is where the government could come in and set up, policies and programs to provide the right amount of incentives to say these are going to be SMEs in action. They are not going to be large-scale collections. So we need to create some models in different cities where it's well integrated with a solid waste management system. And that's how we're going to have a post-consumer ecosystem and essentially to develop a valorizable secondary raw material market. But just one more point I would add, because a lot of post-industrial feedstock, or what we call as pre-consumer, the factory waste, again, is not valorized enough. So even as the data suggests a lot of post-production waste is going into circular economy, they're not really going into the sort of where it's most valuable, right? It's downcycle or upcycle, but we need to really go in. These need to go into the production chain, because otherwise we're wasting a lot of resources.
Great. Vadi, I'm going to come to you. We're talking about infrastructure. You head the world's second largest man-made cellulosic producer. And Canopy has worked with Birla over the last 13 years. We've been we've enjoyed our working relationship with your team and redefining what's possible. And I think we're all cognizant that next gen at scale is kind of the next frontier. And so you're seeing some of your competitors in China kind of moving forward. What are some of the things that you feel need to be true for Birla and for India to be able to really scale the integration of next gen?
I think one, surprisingly counterintuitively, India's percentage of textile waste which goes into landfill incineration is much lower than the rest of the world. That's because we do downcycling, right? Because we are a resource efficiency is a very big focus, and if you go back to small towns that I come from, nobody would throw their textile waste. Nobody would throw their apparel. They would hand over to somebody else to use. And that will go into making a pocha or a cotton waste in the plants. So around 50% of textile waste in India actually, which is usable, which is cotton waste, which is a large fiber in India, doesn't actually go for landfill. So the context of India is very different. And I think that stage of development we are in, I don't think there is a huge focus from consumers or governments to push for infrastructure or push for sustainability in clothing. Because I think the challenges are very different. Indian textile industry, though it is historically very large and still is trying to grow, but has to become very competitive. It's a very fragmented value chain. And those who are from the industry, I'm assuming here, has so many steps in the value chain, from wood to pulp to fiber to yarn to weaving to processing to garment. By the time it reaches to the consumer, a lot of consumers don't even know what is this fabric garment made of. Given that there is a context, I think India, if it becomes more efficient, scale up. There will be some point of time where probably there could be a consumer demand for sustainability material, or the government may say, okay, we have reached a certain level of maturity in this industry, and hence can we look at alternative feedstocks. If you go to another corollary, which is, for example, paper industry in India, right, which I come from earlier, right? You talked about paper. In fact, today, you talked about the wood shortage and availability. The wood that is consumed in the textile industry, for textile industry, is just less than 3% of the total wood that is harvested. Because a lot of the 97% is going for paper, furniture, timber, and in making homes, etc. in the developed world. Not so much in India, right? That industry has evolved recycling as a competitive edge rather than looking at a sustainability. 65% of Indian paper and paperboard industry uses recycled paper, recycled fiber, not virgin wood pulp. So I think that has happened because there have been technology developments. To recycle, there are European vendors today who can supply that equipment technology. There is a collection mechanism, not so great in India, as good as Europe, but still there is a technology, the collection system that has evolved over a period of time. This is possible in textile too, provided there is a pull and it becomes commercially very, very attractive for all the value chain players. Today, when we try to send fiber with alternative feedstock, our next partner in the value chain there is a resistance. One, his machine speeds drop. So they don't want to use any of this fiber because the machine speeds have been going up. In the last 10 years, my colleagues tell me the machine speeds have become double. So when you have machine speeds higher, you need stronger fiber to run the machines, right? In fact, some of our old technologies can't feed even the virgin fiber to those machines because it's an effort. We have to provide discounts, etc. Second is there has to be a consumer pull. And consumers, at least in India, I'm also a consumer, so are you. Very, very few, a very small percentage of Indians would like to pay extra for greener fiber or greener products. They would like to get the same functionality, right, at a lower price. So I think this ecosystem, Sundar talked about it, that a lot of people, a lot of players are there. We are one player. We are committed to recycling. We are committed to T2T. I can't commit the numbers here. But we have invested, we collaborate with research agencies, we collaborate with Indian and foreign institutes for development of some of these solutions. We have an arrangement with CERC, we have an arrangement with Circulars to co-develop some of these solutions. And we invested millions of dollars in the last 5 years to develop ecosystem in our plants, to be able to take those feedstocks to make some, respectable fiber so that our customers accept it even if it is a higher price.
Thank you, Buddy. And I think your history and your experience within the paper sector will be incredibly valuable in this transition as well, right? Like it was about competitive edge and competitive positioning, and I think the same will be true. That's what's going to drive this forward as well. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you will know this number better than me trying to kind of salvage it from my archives. It was India scaled up 60 million tons of recycled paper capacity in just over 5 years. That's correct, right? Rapid kind of transition point within the sector. And I think we're looking at that same kind of industrial transition in this parallel industry. Paul, coming over to you, capital. There's an estimated $13 billion, I think is what we estimated at Canopy in the opportunities paper, $13 billion infrastructure investment opportunity across both paper-based packaging, agricultural or next-gen paper-based packaging in India, as well as in textiles. Obviously, sometimes there's a bit of a mismatch around kind of the scale of capital that's flowing into this transition point. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit with your PDS Ventures hat on, a little bit about how you see kind of that scale of capital getting unlocked and what kind of ventures you see as an investor are kind of most able to make the hop.
Yeah, I think, look, there's plenty of money out there and being invested. I think actually at the moment probably there's a couple of skeletons that VCs are seeing where maybe startups have failed as they started to try and industrialize. So I think where we are now, actually to unlock more capital and probably make the capital work harder is how do we plumb into the existing system of startups to make sure that actually, and we talked about that, the partnership that we've got there. So actually, if we can work with partners above and below and kind of think about how we make that capital work harder for us, I think that's the opportunity that we've got. And I think sometimes what we've seen at PDS Ventures and what we're trying to do is unlock that kind of supply chain below, that supply chain above, and that it's plumbed in at the start. And I think that's part of the problem where we're seeing failure and probably capital not working as well as it should do.
Excellent. Kathleen, I know that kind of like you're part of what Paul like just described there, right? In terms of where you sit. Where are you feeling that there's most fundamental incentive misalignment, given the experience that you have at Circ?
Sorry. I think the most fundamental misalignment. So I think I want to comment on something that Vadi said, that I don't think the onus should be on the consumer to make the right decision. People don't make the right decisions. They buy what they wallet and they buy what they like. So I think we should strip consumers out of the decision framework. I think where we really see incentives lie is at a policy level. I'll give you a good example. So I don't come from fashion. I worked in finance for a long time. I did a lot of financing of green infrastructure and related projects. And then I moved into the electric vehicle segment. And I was responsible for rolling out electric charging stations all over Europe for a specific company. And the reason why we were able to roll things out so quickly is because multiple governments said, if you buy an electric car, you, the consumer, will get a tax rebate and you will get preferential parking. Everybody in Europe wants to park as close to their house and the supermarket as physically possible. And everybody wants a tax.
I think that's a universal phenomenon.
Yeah. But we don't have driveways. And so those incentives created this natural demand for the product, which created a natural demand for my product, which was charging infrastructure. In the textile industry, this is severely lacking. There's a lot of conversation around EPR and recycled content requirements, but until that's mandated and an organization has to input that into their product, nobody's going to just decide, actually, you know what, I'm going to do this. I think that's the first instance. And I think the second one is we need to have a more kind of cross-functional working relationships between brand sourcing, suppliers, and technology providers like ourselves, because ultimately I sell a raw material. I'm not even tier 4, I'm almost tier 5 at the back of the chain. So for a brand who's buying a finished garment to buy my product, it's sort of unreasonable. So we need that kind of orchestration to work together to make sure that everybody is pulling the product through. But ultimately, honestly, policy is the main factor that enables anything. You saw it in electrification of greenfields, like when you had solar panels, they had special like procurement contracts that governments were mandated to buy green energy. So if you don't start at the top, it's never going to trickle down to the bottom.
I'd like to pick up on 2 points there. One is around the policy piece, right? I think, I was part of a roundtable yesterday where the Minister and the Madam Secretary were actively inviting some key stakeholders to actually give them input on, what's needed, what does the government need to do. So if each of you got to wave a magic wand, kind of like what would be your one, maybe two top priority policy priorities that you think could really help unlock? We can start maybe Paul at your end and kind of roll this way.
I kind of think Europe's in the right direction, but it's kind of, I know policy's kind of been delayed, diluted or deleted. So I think Europe's pushing in the right way. We just need to get on with it. And I think to Kathleen's point, actually, we know what we need to do. It's out there. It's in black and white. We just need to get on and do that. And I think actually a lot of the brands and retailers are ready for the policy, so they're not sat waiting, thinking, that we've got maybe a feeling that policy is going to be delayed or pushed out, or the threshold of when you come in there is going to drop. So they're ready, and I think we just need to get on with it, and that I think will change behaviour. The concern around, I guess, if you look at the US, is actually conversation around sustainability and maybe doing the right thing has fallen away over the last 2 years. So I think for me, we know what policy needs to be implemented. It's there. We're getting on there, and the good retailers and brands are not fearing it. The ones that are kind of playing fast and loose with the supply chain, actually, I don't think they really understand that once that policy comes, what it will do and how it's going to change the way that they procure goods. And it will be a game changer. Just as I drove home that night and came back, it completely changed the conversation of how you procure garments and what goes into that garment or that product. So I just want what's promised to...
Extended producer responsibility or ESPR or any... Right. Sundar, do you want to, or folks can just feel free to pile in.
I'm just going to sort of second what Paul said. EU is in the right direction, also picking on Kathleen. It's a regulatory demand. I mean, the ESPR is a market access legislation, and therefore anyone who is going to export from any country would have to adhere to those requirements. We're still waiting for clarity on whether it will be an information requirement or a performance requirement. But one gets a sense that a certain percentage of recycled content would be mandated. It's and it's going to be rolled out in 2030 or 31. So that's one part. The second part is if you look at, say, India, because we are at Bharat Text, if you look at plastics recycling, if we look at battery recycling, even cooking oil, for example, they have gotten more attention. E-waste is another. They have got more attention than, say, textile recycling so far. The government has put in so much of effort on these streams, especially batteries, and I think Europe is also doing the same. The textile secondary raw material market hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. Right? So, and like I said earlier, so the incentives have to be spread across different parts of the value chain. For the recycling technologies, it's going to come up with the tier 5, and then you need to move it to tier 4. And even at the HS code level, maybe that's a global conversation, you need to have a specific HS codes for products with a certain percentage of recycled content with even lower tariffs. So we need to devise some innovative policies to get this going.
Great. Kathleen and Vadi, what would be one policy initiative, incentive that would be particularly helpful for either of you?
So policy has two forms. There's a carrot and a stick. I don't believe in sticks. People don't respond well. People really respond to carrots. So if I had to choose, it would be, and I'm making this up, there would be a special tax rebate for companies who are using a certain percentage of sustainable fibers over a certain threshold. Because if I'm the CFO of a business and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I get to strip off some of this kind of cost component for this specific trade-off, I'd obviously work out, if there's a margin in there, but assuming there is, then I would go for that. I think that would be my dream idea.
Yeah, I think if I specifically talked about in India, this fiber is 6% of all the fibers used. So there is a piece on fossil fuel based and one on MMCF. If I come to MMCF, I think one policy that can enable is to provide capital support for scaling up R&D ideas of how can you convert alternative feedstocks to a quality that is acceptable to the fiber makers at a competitive cost. That will be a big game changer. Second will be, which is more ecosystem related, a policy framework for encouraging startups to look at textile waste collection and recycling, which is not very efficient today. I would say these two.
Affordable capital and kind of the input aggregation.
Yeah, capital. I mean, see, today Government of India does provide capital support for certain R&D activities, certain scale-up activities, but that's very small.
Okay.
And we need innovators like Sir can also come in India and set up shop here. Then what happens is then your supply chain is here and you understand the value chain, you understand the lay of the land, and you scale up.
Larger tickets. Let's also talk about the other piece of the puzzle, which is there's a lot of talk about aggregated demand. And I know, Kathleen, one of the things that you were kind of flagging is that kind of like, especially, and I think we've all experienced it from slightly different vantage points, is the challenge that there is for early to market new fibers being integrated into this highly optimized long value chain that you kind of spoke of, Vadi. And so everybody's talking about aggregating demand. I know that at Canopy we've developed and with some of our very close partners, both with green shirt producers as well as brands, developed a pre-competitive vehicle to help smooth out some of those early to market bumps that there are. But let's just talk about product pull-through and aggregated demand for both from the pulp right through to the garment stage, and I'll just toss it open to anybody who wants to speak to that.
I thought it was directed at me. I think aggregated demand. So I think it's useful, but I think I'm just thinking more broadly now. Mm-hmm. It's useful to have aggregated demand because I think if you have each individual company buying a little bit, that obviously aggregates into a larger pull through. I think the bigger component, and I like what Vadiraj said, if you'd given me 2 points to give to the government, I would have agreed with this second. I think the second point around having some sort of financial support that enables things to be cost competitive is really, really crucial. Mm-hmm. Or there's a component of financing that allows you to ride down the cost curve, because honestly, innovation, it's never going to be completely comparable to what's in the market at the moment that's been running for several years. There has to be a period of adoption that allows you to reach economies of scale. And that's kind of the valley of death, I think, that a lot of us are going through right now. So I think if economy, sort of aggregation has a role to play in that, I think having everybody say, okay, I want a little bit, will allow us to pull that through. But doing so together with some capital support is really important to allow all those people that are buying to buy at prices that work for their businesses and their end consumers.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think there's like roles like organisations like Fashion for Good, where brands and retailers come together and work on projects as a collective. And I think I kind of come back to this legacy system as well that we've got, and we talked about sustainability departments. We're talking in the room prior to this is actually, you've touched on it about the resilience. We need to think as fibres the way we think about sourcing from vendors or from countries, and think of it with a longer term lens. Unfortunately, we work in an industry that's probably working on three 3 seasons and no longer, and doesn't look beyond the end of its nose. And we need to take a longer term view. And fibre, I think, gets overlooked. So, and part of the issue that we've got in the legacy systems is we've got sustainability teams feeding into commercial teams, and they don't speak the same language. And this could be internal teams as well, and probably bombarding the buyers with several different solutions. Actually, brands and retailers need to think about what is it we're going to go for it, and let's just go for it, but think about it from a commercial aspect. And one of the good things that I'm starting to see now is some of the more progressive brands and retailers is that the directors of buying are moving into the sustainability team. So they understand the pressures that the buyer are in. They'll do the edit. They'll present a solution in a way that the buyer understands. We talked about, supplying yarn and yarn. You go into a potential brand and retail and you say 10% more expensive than a conventional yarn. What the buyers need to see is actually what does that mean in a finished product, because 10% on a raw material actually is a lot less than a finished product, and we don't make it easy, I think, for the ultimate decision maker to start to drive these kind of things. So green shoots, organisations like Fashion for Good can really start to aggregate and support brands to buy together and buy deep, but then also the brands and retailers thinking about how they kind of leverage that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that kind of making it as easy as possible to plug and play into existing systems. We've definitely found that at Canopy with the hot button report has just made it very easy for brands to plug in and take and pop it into preferred supplier listings. And I know that, Canopy's working with Fashion for Good and Fashion Pact. A number of us are really turning our minds to how to aggregate demand, make it as easy as possible. We are, I think, like moments away from being kind of like cattle prodded off the stage. I think we had Slidos and Mentimeters and things like that we had ready to go. I just maybe we'll do that at a very close at the last piece. We do have, and maybe Khushbu has moved over it so that I remembered, we do have kind of real life touch, and we have a show and tell aspect of Next Gen. Some of them actually produced, the fibre produced by Bila. I think we also have some Circ fibre in there as well as Circulose and others. But just to wrap, one kind of like when we meet again this time next year, what is the one development, either the one decision that you have agency over or the one development that's happened within the sector that will be a real milestone of progress?
I think one, like H&M, if we have, I believe that more and more branded players, if not from India, at least from Europe, would seek more recycled fiber-based, recycled feedstocks or alternative feedstocks in the fiber. And we have more circs and circulars who actually start, commercially manufacturing and maybe look at India as a destination.
Maybe we come a long way, but if I have to wish something, next year's Bharat Tex, I would like state governments to be more aware of this topic, because this is still a very new area for them. And I can give you one example. I was looking at one particular state government's textile policy, and their incentives were very generic, meaning they would have incentivized open loop recycling. And I had to literally call them and say, look, the global trend is that you're moving away from open loop recycling, and therefore you need to differentiate the incentives. So I think if more and more state governments in their textile policies are aware of this development and integrate their incentives that way into their policies, I think that would be a good progress from a policy perspective.
Paul, quick rapid fire.
Yeah, more innovators embedded into the existing supply chain and kind of ready to go.
Great. Kathleen?
I think clear access to capital, opportunities to access capital, particularly in this market where I think you have fantastic projects like PM Mitra that are very well set up. It's just access to that capital is the difficult part.
Fantastic. Okay, that is a wrap. That is all that we had time for. Thank you for being on this galloping horse journey with us. Thank you to our spectacular speakers for your commitment to actually really shifting the dial on this space. And I know that people will be available for questions. So I think we are about to be ganged up. Oh, and we have a Mentimeter on the... So, diversifying the future fiber basket, building the business case for next gen and circular materials. Okay, the audience poll is... Is there a question coming up? Okay, there we go. Everybody pop out your phones. Let's have a quick crowdsourced... And I think from this conversation, I think it's really clear that the next gen transition is happening. We're not just talking about something that's in the future. It's really around how do we create the right conditions for this transition to happen as quickly as possible, is really and that we have other sectors, other transitions and tools that we can draw on. It's really around how we come together as an ecosystem to deploy them. So currently the biggest barrier. How many folks here are with brands? How many folks a couple of brave people popped their hands up very tentatively. How many folks here are within the manufacturing value chain? Okay. And everybody else? Okay. Okay, and next question? And then we'll wrap. Biggest risk for not diversifying the fiber basket? I think this is an open-ended question, so feel free to just type your answer in, and we'll make sure that if you registered for this or if you're interested in any of the outputs from it, feel free to just pop your card with my colleague Shruti, who spoke at the beginning of the session, and we'll make sure that we loop back to you. Great. I think we can wrap the session whilst folks pop their contact stuff. Yeah, a lot of pieces that kind of dwell on business as usual, right? And just how business as usual is probably the biggest risk moving forward.
We would also like to invite Dr. Bimal Mavadia to give closing remarks. He is the chairman of ISEPC, which is the Indian Silk Export Promotion Council.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today's session was really fruitful. You have raised very varied questions to the learned speakers, and they had replied very well also, which is very, very relevant in today's context. And I think Canopy will make a report for that, and that we can use for our future developments. I just want to give few words. The whole fiber system in the world, there are only two sources. One is the water intensive crops, and second is the fossil fuel dependent. Today's subject was not a fiber portfolio, but was a risk consideration for our future demand and diversifications. By 2030, we have to cloth over 900 billion people. All our sources in terms of fossil, in terms of crop, in terms of land are more or less fixed. So within the availability we have today, we have to work all together to create more avenues, diversifications, new fibers, blendings, and many, many things. And we have to go away from the present system to a new system and a new creation. What is happening, if we see the fossil fuel fibers, if you go many years back, this was not in existence. We were only depending upon the natural fiber. So this has come into the existence, and then it has covered a big part of our daily demand. Similarly, what I suggest, what I think that something should be worked out which can replace whatever we are using today, which can be replaced of present use to a new thing, new sustainable product, something like that. By 2030, there will be mainly three forces, in my opinion. One is the regulation. Second, the brand commitments. All the peoples are here. And reality of the resources. So we have to work for our future basket on these lines, increase the capacity, increase the blending, increase the new fibers, something like that. With these words, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And thanks to everybody for your participation. Interesting to see all of these responses, a lot of them obviously around the kind of like pressures that are on our natural systems and supply chains. We're just going to, that's a wrap for the session. Obviously, we're just going to take a photograph and then speakers will be available or transitioning to other meetings. So thank you, everybody.
You're on a stand, aren't you?